Hello and welcome to the next episode of When Tomorrow Comes. I'm Charlotte Orrell, Senior Futures Consultant in the ICD Futures team, and I'm chatting this week on the topic of levelling up the nation's economy post-pandemic. Joining me today are some of our usual ICD contingency, Matt Kingham and Nick Ireland from the ICD Economics team. Hello to you both in the office. Morning.
Morning. How are you doing, Charlotte?
Hello. And then we are lucky enough to be joined by Glenn Affey of Cambridge Econometrics. I don't know why I find that word so hard to say, but welcome and thank you for joining us, Glenn.
Good morning.
Morning. So Matt, I'm going to go over to you. You wrote an interesting and perhaps part controversial article this week on levelling up across the country. Do you mind giving us a little brief summary and highlighting the pertinent points of that?
Sure, thanks, Charlotte. So a big topic, not easy to unpack in 400 words. I guess now that the COVID vaccine is with us, is being rolled out, we're beginning to look at 2021 more positively and think about where the economy is likely to go. Obviously, a lot of challenges, a lot of ground to make up. We've seen unemployment rise, many people on furlough, some sectors hit really hard, and the UK is a global economic challenge that we're now facing. I think going back to the end of 2019, the government had set out a levelling up agenda, and the budget, which was in March of this year, which was kind of being announced at the same time as COVID was just hitting us, started to look at how levelling up might take place. I think the most recent spending review in November has taken that further. Of course, the Chancellor's got the challenge of COVID alongside how we can look at levelling up. So I think we've got really interesting challenges and dynamics. There is funding, it's a £4 billion levelling up fund which has come through. We've got a new green book from the Treasury, which is trying to look at a slightly changed approach to how particularly the public sector can put funds in around the UK to generate more level playing fields. So things are a little bit different. I mean, it's fair to say that the idea of levelling up in one way or another has been around for several decades, but we've never had a challenge like this since the Second World War. So I think it's a really interesting time to be working in the field. And one of the questions is, what's the role of development, placemaking, development industry within both the recovery at large, but also within the levelling up agenda? And I think certainly the government's looking to infrastructure in particular, but also the role of development and construction and local plans to play a really firm part in this. So lots to think about, lots to talk about.
Thanks, Matt. Glenn, thanks again for joining us. You want to give us a little intro into yourself, and do you have any initial comments on Matt's article and some of the points he's raised?
Yes, I'm Glenn Affey. I'm the principal consultant for regions, cities and local areas at Cambridge Econometrics. Been doing a lot of work on COVID-19 impacts over the past 6 months. So yeah, I mean, my initial reaction is that it is a very challenging time for the economy and for localities. The impacts of COVID-19 significantly on inequalities and people on lower incomes or lower skilled jobs have been immense, and they're accelerating trends in our local economy, such as decline of retail or increasing digital remote working. So I think there's a lot of challenges to deal with on top of Brexit. I think that I think infrastructure spend is necessary, but my caveat is that the impacts have been mainly human, and capital spending isn't enough of a solution, particularly given how long it will take to actually get some of these capital projects up and running. So that's my initial response. Yeah, so happy to expand on that.
So interesting, obviously, talking about the capital expense. If we're looking at the development industry then as a whole, and we're looking at what they can necessarily do now to help that, beyond just the expense coming in, what do you think the development industry could do to aid immediately?
I think there's obviously some shovel-ready projects, you know, that have been delayed in recent years, like electrification, you know, of like Transpennine route and so on, which could probably be implemented quite quickly. So there are transport projects ready to go, and things like mass transit projects in cities. But I think that part of the challenge is like we're not quite understanding the role of things like city centres or employment sites. So that presents problems for developers, you know, because they're looking to invest and make a return, and it's probably quite uncertain for them at the moment. So I think it's at the moment it's a case of where we know there are very good projects with long-standing requirements and a long-standing good case, then we should prioritise those for investment. Because I think, given the nature of uncertainty in the economy, it'd be difficult to persuade developers to engage in very risky activity. So,
yeah, I mean, just perhaps picking up on that, Glenn. I think you're right. It's kind of a range of shovel-ready projects, as you say, that can push the button on. It seems like the government are going to be putting more money towards Homes England to take forward sort of site assembly, putting infrastructure in place on difficult sites. So, it feels like the government's going, and as you say, some development parties might see risk as off-putting to a number of projects. It looks like the government's probably going to try and step in and try and plug some of those gaps that might have been difficult in the past. I mean, one of the outcomes of Brexit that the government are wrestling with right now is sort of competition and state aid issues. And depending on what happens in about 3 days' time with Brexit, that will actually have an effect on potentially how the way in the medium term the government can intervene. It may in reality be the short term, depending on that outcome. So there's probably quite a lot at stake, I think, in who's going to take the lead on some of these things.
Yeah, I mean, agreed. I think, improving site viability, as you kind of alluded to, is a good short-term measure. I think that one of the potential difficulties with Brexit is, things like construction materials and costs. It's going to impact those supply chains. I think as well, the government seems wedded to private housing. Could we quickly restore some social housing, like management, construction? That would seem to be, another option. So I personally think, in a crisis, which I think we're in, and will continue, there are going to have to be some solutions that perhaps were not politically palatable before, or will have to be brought to the fore again, in my view.
I've been looking at the news this morning, and one of the key things, I suppose, at the moment is looking at Brexit in potentially a few weeks and the disruption that might provide to supply chains in a range of areas. And it sort of feels like we've got a core period where there could be in some areas some quite significant disruption. But I suppose I'd be interested in are there opportunities that come out of that in terms of opportunities for growth in domestic supply chains, in more local growth in certain areas where there potentially could be tariff barriers. Is that an area which?
I think it could be, but I think the problem is in UK is totally unprepared for that to bring in plug these gaps in the supply chain in the short or medium term. You couldn't see them being plugged within 12 months. I think another aspect is house building. A lot of it is funded by private investment, some of it overseas. And I just think, everything's in flux in terms of risk profiles for different investment classes. So, yeah, we were very uncertain, what investment will be forthcoming for private house building as well. So that's another uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if we look back a decade or so in terms of the the housing market. Affordable housing, social housing delivery through the last recession was up relative to, I suppose particularly relative to private sector and private sector output. So it does look like that's one opportunity.
I mean, I think there's also interestingly, there's the town and city centre kind of debate of what's going to happen to, the decline of retail, and what are the options for city centre or town centre, because we already seen some retail conversion to housing and apartments. So that might be quite interesting, because, a lot of the locational advantages such as transport and amenities are already there. So I think that could be interesting just to see where that goes.
This is at the same time as the consultation on PD rights for change of use for Class E to residential, isn't it? I won't go into that detail for opinions on that right now. It's just interesting you say that. Also, would you say that the impact of the pandemic has been equal across the regions, or would you say it has been different, and each local area now has to tackle their recovery in a very personalised and slightly different way?
I think it's been very different, from the more obvious local impacts, such as localities that are reliant on tourism, for example, or the visitor economy, or leisure spend, or hospitality, to localities that depend on aviation, or nearby airports like Gatwick or Heathrow, or Manchester Airport. It's been very uneven, especially in terms of the types of jobs affected and ability to work remotely as well. So we've got uneven spatial impacts, uneven impacts amongst different people, depending on what job they do, what kind of income they have. Of course, then there's more young people are in hospitality and retail jobs, more women are in retail jobs, hospitality, and things like key worker jobs. So there's been inequality spatially, gender, age, ethnicity, that have all been apparent. So I personally think that given the urgency of the crisis, that I think one of the difficulties with the past approaches by the current government is they tend to parcel out money for quite restricted use, whereas I don't think we've got time to set up a committee or a SAR or a review of what to do next. More or less just got to make the money available for localities to get on and spend and do what they think needs done. So I just don't think there's time to pause.
I guess it's one of the things that's come out strongly this year is that when the government wants to move and change things very fast, it can't sit in a matter of weeks or days.
Exactly, and I think things like local authorities have responded with things like business rates and business grants very quickly. They've got all the business grants out of the door in 2 weeks in some authorities. So it shows that they can actually deliver, really effectively.
It's definitely been difficult to get hold of some of the economic development officers in authorities because they are very busy doing funding big work, which is absolutely the right thing. I mean, I think one sort of interesting aspect of starting to look into next year is, as you say, Glenn, the hospitality and retail sectors are the hardest hit, and looking recovery for hospitality, we can see that perhaps kind of working its way back to good levels of employment. I think retail has much more uncertainty, and there's issues then about retraining people, what growth sectors may come in to fill that. Is it and that kind of disparity between higher value jobs, maybe around the kind of IT sector, versus the more gig economy, the deliveries, people working in warehouses. Warehousing distribution is one of the growth sectors that we're looking at. There's a strong demand there. But of course, there's an element of risk in putting people in some low value jobs versus the potential to try and do that, and the whole retraining process that goes alongside that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficulty with the UK is it has this dual labour market. It's called the hollowed out middle, whereas there's some very highly skilled jobs and then there's some very low skilled jobs, and we don't. The jobs in the middle, whether trades or administrative, have been hollowed out, have been reduced. So it's a challenge to look at individuals in maybe those lower skilled jobs without degree level qualifications, and then think about how you can get them into higher skilled jobs or get them to progress. I think that when you're looking at where the jobs are in the future for these kind of entry level jobs, it is in things like adult social care, which, you know, or in the health service, which are, you know, do suffer from recruitment crises.
Well, I think that the construction sector, for those shovel-ready projects, as you say, some that are ongoing, does provide some opportunity. I mean, we suffered in the last session with a bit of a decimation of small house builders and construction sort of technical skills, and some of those, I think it's fair to say, have been coming in from Europe over the last 10 years. That, you know, we might see a slowdown in availability of labour from Europe, and possibly routes to try and reskill and retool up in construction. Clearly, construction's got, you know, modern methods of construction as one emerging industry. I think that with, you know, where projects do need labour, there are various routes around sort of apprenticeships and training, and, you know, we're focusing where possible to drive people into that. Seems like, you know, one of several areas where we can look to get some support.
It would seem sensible, yeah. I mean, it would need major support because of the fragmentation of the industry, you know, and the subcontracting that goes on, and just actually the demands of the construction industry. It's highly skilled. It's working outdoors. It's working at you know, quite a, you know, the performance expectations are quite high. So yeah, I would see that is definitely opportunities, but it would need a lot of support, and perhaps a change in thinking about how training and development's provided.
One topic that we haven't got into too much yet, I think it's worth touching on, is the kind of, you know, the green agenda. I nearly said the green book, but that's a separate thing. But I think kind of the green revolution, and some feedback I have had from the article is, you know, how important that is, and this is perhaps a moment in time to recognise that rebuilding has got to focus on you know, carbon emissions, and, you know, we have had at the same time as the spending review, the government's got a 10-point plan for the green industrial revolution. It's difficult at the local level to really, I think, at the moment, unpack what that means. We have got a green grant scheme, and both from general but personal experience, people that is encouraging labour. It's quite a short-run project at the moment, so whether that can be extended, perhaps it's a question mark. I think that, you know, retrofit is going to be a long-term project for the UK. New homes, sustainable new homes is one thing, but only make a small percentage of our total stock. So retrofitting our stock is clearly really important to the green agenda. I think that, you know, where we can look to get localities drawing on green jobs is a really good opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think any long-term commitments to retrofit or any other green kind of, you know, green delivery is going to be welcomed, because it's, you know, we've lacked that in recent years, like long-term commitments, long-term resources. I think as well that, you know, at the local level, there's been lots of declarations of climate emergencies, but there's not been enough kind of action planning or joint working between local authorities to understand, you know, what they can contribute. Some local authorities have, you know, power stations or other, you know, big emitters of like carbon, and, you know, it's unlikely that they'll be able to close those down in the next 10 years. So there's got to be some kind of strategic oversight of, you know, some local authorities will, you know, have carbon capture and will actually be able to reduce carbon emissions for themselves and others. So yeah, I think more of a strategic thinking, but up towards that action, like what can be done in the short, medium, and long term, would be good, and it helps give more certainty to business and to things like skill supply to be able to help deliver this.
Thanks, Glenn. I'm conscious of time. I'm going to have one last question. And Matt, this is aimed at you just because you put it in your article, but you've used the phrase business as usual, and that can be quite controversial. So what is business as usual for 2021?
Good question. Yeah.
All right.
So as I say, I've had some feedback that I think it was used in inverted commas in the article. I hope so. It's a good question. Yeah, what is business as usual? I mean, for many people, who are on furlough or unemployed, there is no business. For those of us who are still working, we're trying to get back to some normality. Businesses want to get going. We just had this morning the ONS results for October, which is pretty slow growth. Brexit's obviously a huge level of uncertainty. I think everyone really wants to get back to work. I think the home working trend and the effect on particularly offices has been a question mark over the last few months. My feeling as time goes on, I think, is that people will be going back to offices. I would guess probably those on 5 days a week might be thinking, well, we'll only do 3 or 4 days a week. But I think that the productivity impacts of working at home, issues with sort of poor ability to kind of be creative with people, connectivity issues. I think a lot of us are tired of that now. Want to get back to that kind of collaborating with colleagues. Business as usual for the government is not going to be recognised for many years. The level of public spending that's gone on, and I think the kind of expectations from the Office of Budget Responsibilities, it's going to be a good 3 or 4 years before we can get back to the employment levels we were at pre-pandemic. So it's not going to be business as we know it.
Unusual time.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Well done. Thanks for joining us, Glenn. I'm going to have to wrap us up there. And thanks, Matt and Nick, for taking part. And again, thanks for those who have checked in and who are listening. And I hope you all join us again for the episode next week.